During one of the smaller disasters that preceded the really big disaster, I met a lot of neighbors online. My Minneapolis block had always been reasonably friendly. People would take their kids around on Halloween, and I knew the names of the next-door neighbors. When the internet and cell phones went down, my next-door neighbor to the north, Tanisha, built a little booth in her yard out of plywood with corkboard inside and a roof. When I went in the first day to check it out, people were already posting up notes, asking to swap stuff. Cat food for diapers, a bike repair for a plumbing repair, and the stores were empty, but maybe someone on the block had what you needed. It was weird, early on. I was still chugging away. The water stayed on, although we had to purify it. The stores nearly always had canned vegetables on the shelves, and everyone joked about how somewhere there was a secret underground warehouse crammed with canned bees. The pharmacy a few blocks away was still getting regular deliveries of anything designated critical meds. Stuff like insulin, which was a relief to Tanisha. There was also the thing that worked some of the time, but not all of the time, like the electricity. There were all these things that were just gone from the stores. Tampons, AAA batteries, WD-40, duct tape. I started going over every day around noon to make Tanisha moderate the booth, which mostly meant taking down obsolete notes. And after 2 weeks when the internet still hadn't come back, I helped her build a second booth. We should check on people, don't you think? She said as I held the board in place for her to hammer. Most of the blocks is using this, but not everyone. I hadn't noticed, but she was probably right. Across the street, the screen door banged shut, and the old guy who lived there came brusquely across the street. He was holding something that looked sort of like a power drill. "Hey, I'm Lem," he told me. "Hold that board you've got right there." Tanisha put down her hammer, and the power drill thing turned out to be a nail gun, which made short work for the hammering. "Also, you want me to fix the roof on that other one, so it doesn't drip inside when it rains?" He didn't put up a question mark at the end, which is fine, because the course he wanted to, and we wanted him to fix it. And while we worked on this, Tanisha got a clipboard from her house and made a list of the houses on the block, filling in what we know about the residents. It was a smattering of names and a lot of phrases like people with the poodle, the one with the generator, the teenager with the really loud car, although he hasn't driven since the gas stations all closed. "Shouldn't we split up the houses?" Tanisha said. "You do the east side, I'll do the west side?" "Okay," I said, feeling the same dragging reluctance I'd felt as a kid selling Girl Scout cookies. I knew perfectly well lots of people would be happy to see me, but I still hated knocking on doors and talking to strangers. I didn't have a clipboard, so I grabbed a notebook from my house to make notes and walked down to the corner to start. Probably 3/4 of the people on our block were already using Tanisha's booth. With the remaining quarter, I introduced myself and told them which house I lived in, explained the booth, and then asked how they were doing. Hanging in there? Did they have food? Did they have necessities? The people with the generator were a mid-block. They lived in a bungalow with faded olive green siding on the fence, and most of us didn't have generators. We just charged up what we could during hours that we had power, and we made do what we didn't. The house's generator ran during every power outage, even the short ones. And when I knocked, no one answered. Not right away. I knocked again, waited. An old guy answered the door. "Hey, I'm Alex from down the street. I'm just checking in with everybody to see if they're okay. Given everything, to let you know about this booth we've got set up." He stared at me silently. "Do you know if anyone has propane?" "I don't know. Someone might." "I'll trade anything. Pay anything. You said I should post a sign. Can you post it for me? I can't leave Susan in here." "I could post a sign for you, sure." Can you wait? And no, just come in. He shuffled backwards to let me in the house. I eased the door closed behind me. The entryway had the closed, stale air of a house that had taken seriously the instructions to close all the windows, to keep out the dust, to keep out the ash. I need to find a paper, pen. Clifford? I heard a woman call. Is someone there? Who is it? I followed him into the living room. An elderly woman sat in a recliner. A plastic tube snaked around her face, with prongs in her nose. She didn't look well. This is Alex. He's going to tell people we need fuel. I don't know if anyone has it, though. Oxygen? I could use the bottled oxygen. People keep propane around. Nobody keeps bottled oxygen around, Clifford said. Have you tried the pharmacy for oxygen? I asked. They have insulin. Pharmacies don't carry oxygen. There are places that carry it, but we used to get it delivered. I only have the phone number, and I can't leave Susan and go around the city. If I had a way to get around, she can't get the generator going herself. And he pointed at a blue plastic gadget that sat next to her, which rattled like a noisy fan. She has what we used to call emphysema. She needs supplemental oxygen. We run an oxygen concentrator. Turn rooms into pure oxygen. Concentrators won't run without power, so I fire up the generator every time the power goes out. We're running out of propane. Don't know what we're going to do when we run out of propane. What if you could find a rechargeable battery? The problem is the oxygen concentrator draws too much power, drains battery too fast. I crouched down, took a closer look. Pulling out a flashlight since the room was dim, the concentrator drew less wattage than an air conditioner, but more than a TV. The only thing that's gotten us this far is that I bought the smallest generator they had. It doesn't run our fridge or anything, it just runs the oxygen concentrator. And we only run it when the power's out. But even so, we're going to be out of fuel. I don't know exactly how soon, but soon. And what happens then? Well, I won't live long after that. There was a shrill whistle of the carbon monoxide detector as the power came back. And the lights and air conditioner and TV all came on simultaneously. I'm gonna go shut down the generator, Clifford said, sprinted out the door. Could you be a dear and move over the plug? Susan said to me, pointing at the concentrator. Move it where? I asked. Just the plug. To the wall outlet. The oxygen concentrator cut off. Clifford must have gotten something outside in the generator. And almost immediately, Susan's face turned grayish. She started to gasp, like she'd sprinted 4 blocks to catch a bus. I looked around, panicked for the wall outlet. She couldn't even point to me, but I spotted it, moved the plug over. Nothing happened. Did I do it right? Do I need to turn it back on? Susan managed to nod. I started hunting around the machine for a button, terrified that I would mess something up if I pressed the wrong thing. Clifford came back, hurrying back just in as I found the on-off switch, which is a completely obvious switch that I'd found immediately if I hadn't been panicking. Using supplemental oxygen isn't supposed to matter right away. It's just I get anxious, you see. I don't believe you're just anxious, Clifford said, and we sat in silence for a moment. Anyway, you can see why we want the propane. And I could. I absolutely could. Well, I'll see what I can do. I wasn't feeling very optimistic. I laid out my list of doors to knock. Do you know any of these people? About half the houses, they said things like, that's where the Garcias used to live, but they moved in 2012. There was one house where Susan said, "Oh, that's Gianna's house. She's been all alone since she lost her husband 2 years ago. Can you check on her too?" I already planned to knock, but hello, your friend Susan asked me to check on you made me feel less strange about it. My tiny cup of coffee was gone, so I set the cup carefully back down on the tray. I'm gonna go post the sign. Please let me know if you need anything. I'll try to make sure somebody comes by. And I was wrong. I was wrong about no one being willing to sell or trade propane. I netted 4 of those 1-pound Coleman cylinders to attach to a camping cove, plus 2 partly full 20-pound cylinders like you'd use for a grill. Clifford cried when I knocked on his door with them. This would, he said, keep them running for another 40-50 hours, and the power was generally out for 2 to 4 hours a day, so that meant another 2 weeks. I could watch Clifford do the same calculations, even if there was anything people wanted in exchange. No. When people heard something needed to live, they said, I could just have it. It's not bad at fixing things. If anyone needs something fixed, someone would have to come sit with Susan in case the power went out, but, well, hey, I'll let people know. Hey, come in for a minute. Clifford, so you're saying you can repair things? Anything in particular? Carpentry. I wrote that down. We're making a list of skills people have. I don't suppose either of you grew up on a farm. I can sew. I don't imagine anyone's going to want a fancy costume, but they might like a zipper. You can do zippers? Do you need a sewing machine for that? I have one. Clifford could bring it downstairs for me. Clearly I should have joined Future Farmers of America instead of the theater club. Hey, we'll manage. We're trying to figure out if there's any way to grow food in people's yards. Lim suggested tearing up the street and growing food there, but that's got some pushback. Well, you won't hear any complaining from us. Whatever anyone else thinks, it's best. I told them Jenna was doing fine and had been worried about Susan. She'd have come back herself to check on Susan and Clifford, but she'd broken her leg before everything started and was still having trouble walking. Getting in and out of her house, it took 4 steps up to the door, was difficult. And Clifford brightened at that. Yeah, I bet you could build her a ramp. It wouldn't be up to code, but it would let her get in, get out. You know if she has any plywood? Lim has sheets of it, now that I think of it. I'll go to his house next. The other blocks around us had seen what we were doing and were getting more organized and swap wars and so on. We started comparing community needs, especially ways to grow food. We wanted a tiller or a cultivator, a turn sod into gardens. No one we'd found had a tiller. There was one cultivator, but it was gas-powered. Maybe someone in the suburbs has an electric tiller they'd take, Lim said. We started tearing up yards and spades, and it was slow going, although I had at least known we weren't putting buried utility lines at risk. I offered to go. My car is electric, so I could get there. And once we started discussing this seriously, Frank said he'd come with me. He worked as a bar bouncer when he was younger, and you can't tell looking at him that these days his back hurts all the time. I told Clifford not to get his hopes up, but to give me all his empty propane canisters, just in case we found a suburbanite with a stockpile they were willing to sell. We had a block meeting to assemble any last-minute requests. Gloria and Lee had donated 4 of the camping canisters and asked how Susan was doing. Well, it depends on how the power holds up. We think we probably got them another 2 weeks. They exchanged looks. If the sun was shining, Gloria said, and the dust and ash in the air meant that it was effectively always cloudy. The solar panels on lots of our houses weren't doing much. Not nothing, but not much. We were all silent for a minute, because if the sun were shining, we wouldn't be in this disaster. We'd be planning summer fun instead of trying to figure out whether we'd be tore off the grass of our yards. We'd be able to grow enough food to get through next winter. What about a wind turbine? I asked. Gloria and Lee had built themselves a windmill with a generator attached, although I wasn't sure how well it was working. It would only work when the wind was actually blowing, Gloria said. That would be something. If they could conserve fuel on the windy days, it would last a lot longer. Well, a big enough battery would work. I know 2 people in the area, plus me, who have electric cars. There are some models you can use as a big rolling generator, but none of ours have that feature. There are ways to do it anyway, with a power inverter, but that could mean it's not available to use as a car in an emergency. My car was getting us to Edina today. It had gotten Khalid up to the hospital the day before yesterday, when he fell off the ladder. What about the bike generator? Tom asked. The kind you pedal. And he pantomimed. Those are about 100 watts, Gloria said. How many watts does the oxygen concentrator draw? 500. Okay. But what if we had 5 bike generators? And each biker making 100 watts? You'd want at least 10. Humans are unreliable. Maybe 12, actually. She filled a notebook out of her pocket and a pen, started making a list. We'd need you to trade for more copper. It's tricky because everyone wants it. Probably easier than fuel, though. Yeah, and bikes. We have all the broken ones in Jack's garage. We can cobble together the bike generators, but we'll need people to pedal. I looked at Tanisha. She looked at me. Well, if the acquisition committee can bring us copper wire, we'll make it work. Bring any propane you find, though, or gasoline. The roads were quiet, mostly bikes and walkers, a few city buses. Everyone, including us, had parked cars sideways to block the streets leading into the neighborhoods, then left them there, then had the gasoline salvaged or looted out of them so the cars definitely were not going anywhere. Traffic on the roads picked up when we got to the edge of the suburbs, and even though all the gas stations were still closed. Also, in addition to the car barricades, we saw something hanging from the street light that for a second I thought was a body. But it wasn't a body. It was a mannequin, though. It was definitely supposed to look like a body. It was very productive, a sort of distressing trip. We found people happy to talk, take in gold and trade for a bunch of useful things, including a spool of heavy copper wire that they'd taken off the bodies of some looters and stuck in a garage. Several suburbanites clearly had a large supply of fuel, but no one wanted to trade anyway. Frank was happiest about the tiller, but I was thrilled about the wire. In addition to the plan with the bikes, we could use this to make a multiple wind turbine. But back in our own neighborhood, Frank handed off the tiller and Lim went to work with it right away. I took the wire over to Clifford in Susan's garage. Clifford had used it as a workshop when he was younger, so it was insulated and reasonably pleasant. Then he slowly filled it with junk. Leah was supervising a team of teenagers who were clearing out the garage, and Gloria was sorting things out and sending them to different garages around the block we were using as a salvage bay for storage. Clifford popped out periodically to explain that a snowblower would probably work again with a new belt or maybe a replacement fire wheel. Gloria sent that to the garage where they'd be building turbines, because a big snowblower auger could be turned into a wind turbine blade. Meanwhile, people were bringing over bikes. There were a dozen broken bikes from Jack's garage, another dozen semi-functional bikes from other people's garages, and 4 actual stationary bikes people brought over when they heard about the project. Gloria's team worked on and off, cleaning rust and getting everything lubricated. Clifford and Susan's garage would have held 2 cars. Emptied out, it looked enormous, and I looked at the workbench on the far wall. need more light in here, Gloria said. We're going to need light that doesn't draw much power, like an LED or something. If we had no power at all, we couldn't have done this. We'd have needed too many people for too many hours to handle it. But the power was still on for parts of the day, every day, most of the day even. We just needed to fill in the gaps. And the first gaps we needed to fill in was the time to change things over, from city power to wind power to bike power. Gloria turned up a couple of the big rechargeable batteries and set them in Clifford and Susan's living room. Why do we need 3? Because humans are unpredictable. With bike power, they'll be sending power in. But if everyone starts pedaling slowly at the same time, we want something to even things out. Make sure your oxygen concentrator is still running. If the wind was blowing, the windmill would take over generating power. But sometimes the power would fail and there'd be no wind. Gloria set up a car alarm to go off when that happened. And that would be the cue for the squad of fit youngsters, mostly teens, to come running to pedal the bikes until the power came back on. And people are really going to do this? Well, we can pay them, of course. How much is it? How much is fair? Hey, people have been working on the food production project for free. Let's see if we can get volunteers. You still have a stash of propane if it doesn't work out. I'd actually thought we'd need to come up with a way to pay people after the first week anyway. It turned out to be exactly like ripping up yards to plant potatoes. People were willing to just do it. No one wanted to be responsible doing all of it. But pedaling a dozen a bike for an hour, for half an hour, lots of people were willing. Can you please tell people to come inside so I can say thank you? Susan asked when I checked in after the first week. Tanisha's daughter Jasmine was sitting on an ottoman pulled up next to Susan's recliner with a basket of yarn in her lap and a crochet hook in her hand. They don't want to be a bother, I said. Well, I'll tell you straight up. We can make lemonade for the first 10. Then they're either going to get lemon juice or they're going to get sugar. Clifford had been going out to the garage to say thank you to the people pedaling, but Susan couldn't. She was stuck in the house with her oxygen concentrator. This was allegedly a portable model, but that seemed to mean was you could roll it over to the bathroom if you had to. How did you leave the house before? I asked, and then wondered if the answer was she didn't. Now that I think of it, I didn't remember ever seeing her. By early May, medication was getting hard to get. The rule was supposed to be that life-sustaining medications were prioritized, which everybody agreed made sense. That turned out to exclude most of the psychiatric meds, no matter how important they were. You could still buy cigarettes, so Frank, who'd quit smoking years ago, but now couldn't get a prescription he needed, went back to smoking as a substitute. 2 days later, Peng stopped by my house with a giant shopping bag and handed it to me. I peered inside and just about recoiled when I saw the unopened boxes of both Abilify and Gabitin. You didn't rob a pharmacy, did you? As if I'd found the Abilify if I had? No. I was doing an IUD for a woman over by the park, and she told me her mom died a few months ago, and she had all these meds left over. There's other stuff in there too, but I just figured I'd bring it to you, all of it. Oh, thank you so much. I'm going to start asking people for leftovers. Leftover stuff. Every time I'm at someone's house. No one around here even throws anything away. There are 3 half-finished packs of antibiotics in there. I mean, if you're not going to finish your antibiotics like they tell you to, at least throw them out. But nope. In late July, a huge storm hit Minneapolis. We had some warnings, both from the extremely ominous clouds and the radio, and I made this quick executive decision that we shouldn't call people to pedal until the storm passed. The storm should be providing plenty of wind, and if wind were bad enough to knock down the turbine, they were bad enough to send people running through the storm. Clifford had a stock of propane, and this would be a good time to use it, and if he needed to. The rain came in sheets, buffeted by the wind. I listened to it rattling on my roof. I paced around in my living room, peering out at the dim afternoon, hoping the rain didn't wash away all the crops we'd planted in the yards we dug up. Hoping no one's basement flooded. Hoping the power stayed on. I wish I'd gone over to Tanisha's to wait. When the power went out, I went upstairs to try to spot Clifford and Susan's house, to see if the wind turbines looked like they were working there. There was too many boulevard trees and too much rain for me to see anything. I paced around, thinking about how we don't want people running around outside in the storm. It was still a perfectly sensible decision, but then put on my shoes and stepped outside. I didn't bother putting on a raincoat because I was just going to have to accept I'd been soaked to the skin. The turbine had been knocked down, and I could see Clifford plus someone in a yellow raincoat bending over to the generator. I waffled for a minute about whether they could use my help or if I'd just be in the way, but then they both straightened up, and I saw Clifford go back in the house, and the person in the raincoat dash back across the street. They'd gotten the generator on. I went back inside and closed the door on a titanic crack of thunder, and what sounded like a tree splitting in half. Tanisha was already organizing people to go clear when we could. 5 people had cordless chainsaws. The real trick was going to be finding all the charged up batteries that could be swapped in. What we were doing to do once they were used up. In the distance I could hear other people's chainsaws, and a generator that wasn't Clifford or Susan's. Clifford and Susan's generator was now off. Peddlers had arrived and taken over. Lee and Gloria were putting the wind turbine back up. Clifford was sitting on the front steps watching them work. Clifford? Hey, Susan's asking for you. Clifford stood up.
On it.
Excuse me? He went inside.
Still on it.
His anger was gone, or at least a well-masked again. Lim, were you here earlier looking for a saw? Can you let him know that I found mine? No, I will, I said. And the radio crews were working around the clock to get roads cleared and lines back up. But it could be days, at least, they weren't saying weeks, till everyone's power was back. That meant we were going to be a lot more peddlers than usual. But we also got a naysayer, who'd previously been ignoring the whole project, and now wanted to complain to Tanisha about what we were doing. It's very sad and all, but it's not like the lady who needs oxygen is going to get better. You're just delaying the inevitable. I thought of Clifford being furious. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Felt a surge of my own anger. Enough that I let Tanisha finish the conversation and then muttered as the guy stomped off down the street. I felt like if I started screaming at him, I might never stop. The wind picked up that evening, and the repairs and wind turbine came breaking up. We used the other turbines of the block to charge up the batteries for the chainsaws. We also checked Clifford's stock and decided to use the generator for a few hours during the hottest part of the afternoon the next day. We had everyone in a wind turbine making ice if they could, to keep the cooler stocked for people with perishable medication. After 4 days, the power came back, as did Clyde, who looked exhausted but had at least been able to ride the bus home through the now cleared streets. And Jasmine and Kalia had been over at his house every day to feed his cats and lift him a batch of cookies they'd baked in a Dutch oven. We turned all those down trees into firewood. Figured we might as well. Summer went by. A lot of what we'd planted didn't grow well. For the same reason the solar panels weren't much use. The lingering ash in the air colored in the clouds. We got a lot of potatoes, though. Some other root vegetables that would tolerate shade. And we planted what we could, what would be full of sun, normally. There were days when we couldn't tell the sun was even out, because there was a shadow on the ground despite the gray sky. And Valeria, who'd been a master gardener at the university extension and appeared to have magical powers over plants, gave all the potato plants pep talks, telling them just to do their best, That seemed to help. In the twilight hours one August morning, I woke suddenly to a loud noise. I was used to being roused by the peddlers, that alarm. Power was on. Also, it had just been one loud noise. I wasn't hearing the whoop, whoop, whoop. That wasn't odd enough. I put my bathrobe and went outside, at which point I found Lim, a dead deer, and a ferocious argument already underway. Lim, apparently, had loaded his hunting rifle, come out into the pre-dawn quiet, and shot one of the deer foraging in the garden. Look, the problem is, they're eating our food. Good news, though, deer are food. Venison jerky is more calories than green beans anyway. Lim, you cannot be shooting off a gun right by where we live. You can't. No one's up. No one was even awake. Anyone who is up isn't outside. Also, those deer are shameless. I got 10 feet from her before I fired. Sure, wasn't going to miss at that distance. Tanisha had come out of her house about a minute after I came out of mine, and everyone paused and looked at her, like they'd agreed it was up to her to figure out what happened next. She looked at the deer, at Lim, and Gloria, at everyone else, and said, "Lim, do you know how to field dress this thing? Get it somewhere it won't make the little kids cry and get started processing it. We're not letting it go to waste. Meet back in an hour, whenever you're done." Leah? I get what you're saying, but he's right. There's hunting, and there's pest control. And he could go somewhere else to hunt, but that won't do much for the pest control. Yeah, there's still a Department of Natural Resources, game wardens, police. I know you folks wouldn't turn me in for taking one. I don't know what the folks by the cemetery. What if... You ever wondered, what if someone shows up trying to loot stuff? Like everything we have. No deadly force against property crimes either, Tanisha said. And that set off another round of arguing. A lot of my neighbors had guns, it turned out. And that probably shouldn't have been a surprise. The number of arguments in favor of deadly force against property crimes probably shouldn't have surprised me either, given how worried everyone was about the food supply. One fall day, I started to take a walk, and I passed Susan's yard. She was sitting out in front of a lawn chair. Her oxygen concentrator plugged into a long, heavy-duty extension cord. She had a giant bushel basket of tiny, semi-wormy animals. A dozen little kids. Gianna, who was still using her walker, and Gail, a woman from the next block who walked with crutches. I went over to say hi and saw they had rounded up vegetable peelers for each child, and had kids painstakingly peeling the tiny apples. The adult cut them carefully into rings, and the youngest children in the group were spreading them around. I went over to take a closer look. "That's amazing," I said.
"We're peeling off the bad spots,"
a little boy informed me.
"Well, that's a good idea,"
Susan said.
"Why don't you see if you can find Alex a nice apple? One of those big baskets by the fence. Gail has an apple tree."
And the little boy came back with an apple. I borrowed a knife and cut it into wedges for myself. The slices, they were delicious. Sweet, crisp. Unblemished apples actually keep pretty well. But I'm not sure there are any unblemished apples, so we're running them into rings to dry. It's something the kids can help with too.
"Are you making the rounds? Looking for something? You've got your clipboard."
Tanisha's thinking about winter. Power outages will mean furnaces can't run. Well, I have a gas furnace. Are they thinking there won't be natural gas? It's a gas furnace, but it won't run without electricity because of the blower. It would be bad if it did, actually, because carbon monoxide would just start building up.
"Mine runs without a blower,"
Susan said.
"Clifford and I have a gravity furnace. It's an older style. Looks like an evil octopus in the basement. runs with no electricity.
The gravity furnace had an enormous barrel-shaped central unit with similarly enormous vents spreading off in all directions. Man, I gotta tell you, I really don't know anything about these. Yeah, we always meant to replace it. They're not very efficient, but having taken it out and replaced it would be so expensive they last forever. No moving parts. Are you cool with people showing up to spend time in your house this winter? Clifford laughed. Sal turned him into leaning against a wall, wiping his eyes and nodding. In early November, a government convoy started coming through on this big main street once a week to distribute relief supplies. The buses got less reliable. I started giving Clyde a ride to and from work when I could. Sometimes I couldn't. During brownouts, there wasn't enough power to charge up my car, and we walked to the plant. The houses with the heat pumps also had solar panels, so did several other people on the block. Predictions said that enough ash should be out in the air by midwinter that we'd be able to get power from those again, although those predictions were making a lot of assumptions, and I sure didn't want to count on that. I don't want to count on those convoys continuing either. In the meantime, we pulled the canned goods from the convoy and passed all the canned beans along to Diana, who had a severe nightshade allergy and couldn't eat potatoes. That was a lot of beans. Way more than fit in her cupboards, I'll tell you that. We stacked them up in her living room and made jokes about the Great Wall of Legumes. We were glad for that, though, because then the convoy didn't come for 3 weeks. After 2 weeks without a convoy, the suburban neighborhood we'd visited earlier in the summer sent over a delegation, wanting to buy our food. They started out hoping to buy with money. When that produced no interest, they upped their bid to fuel. That sent us back to run some calculations. How much do we have? How many government relief convoys do we expect to see based on the rumors we heard? We agreed to trade potatoes for propane, because it would be good to keep the option of the generator open, especially if we had another prolonged outage. Where do you suppose they got that fuel? Tanisha asked when they stepped outside for a private conversation of our offer. Well, either they had a hoarder, or they hijacked a fuel truck. You think a bunch of rich yuppies could pull off a fuel truck heist, though? And they came back with the propane tanks, tried to make us sweeten the deal in that obnoxious way people sometimes will, then left with their potatoes and their bad attitude and went back to the suburbs. I have a bad feeling. Let's add some folks to the people watching overnights for a bit. Tanisha was right about that bad feeling, and I was standing watch at the south entrance to the neighborhood when they came. We used walkie-talkies for communication, although they were the kind of some guy brought from his hunting blind years ago, and they weren't great. Mine went off with a squawk. I heard the word West Entrance over the static before it went silent. I set off the car alarm. We started out using the car alarm to summon people to generator power, but over the months we'd come up with a set of signals in addition to the standard peddlers needed alarm. We had a fire alarm, and also a generic all-hands emergency alarm. West Entrance! I shouted to everyone who headed my way, and the word got passed. Although once the bulk of the neighbors headed in that direction, others stayed to reinforce the spot, in case the West Entrance assault was a diversion. But it wasn't. We were dealing with a coordinated attack, but not an especially sophisticated one. Their plan was just get in, grab stuff, get out. And they'd assume we wouldn't be able to respond quickly enough to stop them. Back in the spring, they'd have been right. A few months now, we'd be drilling a fast response to alarms, not because we were rehearsing for an invasion, but because we were making power for Susan. The interlopers never had a chance. Most of them ran away, but Keith got one in a headlock and another one, by sheer bad luck for him, tripped and went down and broke his own ankle. No one had ever touched him. Despite the no deadly force against property crime rule, Lim and B both had guns with them, but neither gun came out of its holster, and the guy in the headlock flailed around, trying to pull something out of his pocket, but Clyde slapped his hand away. It turned out to have a gun rattling around, loose like a set of keys in one pocket, and pepper spray in the other. We confiscated both. The one who broke his ankle had a gun in a holster where we could see it, but Lim barked instructions at him and the guy didn't even try to draw. Turned out to be an air pistol. We hold our prisoners into Keith's house, I think on the theory that Keith had created this problem by catching someone. And someone went to get Pang to splint the Klutz's ankle. Once we had them in good light, we could see they were just teenagers. That explained a lot. They'd heard we had a surplus of food. Figured they'd swoop in and supplement their own dwindling supplies. Honestly, I think we should ransom them, Keith said. Tanisha shook her head. Find them. Their parents can pay for the damage they've done. And the boys had kicked in the side door of someone's garage before the neighbors had stopped them. The alarm went off again. There was a brief moment of, oh no, what now? And then we realized it was just a call for peddlers. Everyone was awake. Despite it being the middle of the night, most people were still buzzing with adrenaline, so those slots would still be easy to fill. What is that? Asked the injured boy. His name was Kyle. He hadn't told us his name, but the injured one had sworn at him a bunch, so he picked it up. It means we need people to run the generator. See? They have a generator. We're lucky we didn't get shot. Shut up, Jake! Said Kyle. I mean, they're basically paramilitary over here. We run a generator to keep a lady breathing, Keith said, and the boys stared at him in open disbelief. Do you want to see it? Maybe we'll give you some ideas to take home for your own people. Getting them over there was kind of a production. Even splinted, Jake couldn't walk on his injured ankle, so Leah went and found a knee scooter in the garage full of could-come-in-handy stuff that Hawa kept organized. Kyle presented the opposite problem. He could just run for it. He might outrun us if he tried. Keith wound up taking his shoes. It was a cold night, but the generator station was warm because it was well insulated and the peddlers had been at it for a while. There were 12 people on the bikes, 12 hanging out on the sofas at the edge of the room for rest breaks. The room was equipped with an LED string of lights, a meter that led them track wherever they putting down the power regular peddlers had put up. It had started with this nice photo of Susan, which Clifford had hung up early on. Then someone had a picture of his grandma in another state, who hadn't heard from in a while, was hoping was okay. And then someone else put up another poster, a mountain with a blue sky. At this point, the walls were very well decorated. People on the couches were relaxing, waiting their turn with two of them, Keem and Galen, cooperating to come up with the rhymed lyrics about fighting off the suburbanites. Everyone was laughing. They trailed off as we came in. Well, Kyle and Jake wanted to see our generator. Nakeem stood up. Yeah. We generate electricity to keep an oxygen concentrator running. He walked over to the wall to point out the photo of Susan. Is she your doctor or something? An engineer? Why does she have a picture? What makes her so important? She teaches crochet. See those little guys up there? The decor included a shelf of amigurumi. I don't get it. And Akeem was one of those teenage boys who was all limbs, and he stepped up to loom over Kyle, who shrank back. Susan. She's a member of our community. Kyle stopped laughing and swallowed hard. Do you want us to pedal? Well, I'd pedal. Jake's injured. He can't do it. And Akeem loomed over a few seconds longer. No. No one wants you to pedal. We want you to go home to your suburb, tell your buddies not to mess with us. I'd imagine we would have had to haul these boys back ourselves, but by morning their parents were standing at the edge of our neighborhood looking indignant. When Tanisha came out with their sons and said they need to pay a fine to cover the damages they'd done, they angrily threatened to call the police, which made us all laugh. Then they only wanted to pay the fine for Kyle, not for Jake. apparently because Kyle's parents weren't important and Jake's weren't. Although the fact that Jake had fallen down and hurt himself seemed to play into it. Tanisha made it clear that they were packing a deal. No discounts available if you only wanted one. And after a bit more grumbling, we forked over the fine. 20-pound propane tank. Almost full. I arrived at dawn, more or less. Alone. Limping a little bit, because that had been a long walk, and shivering. Although the cold snap we'd been in was easing off. Tanisha threw her coat on over a nightgown and came out. "What are you doing back?" she said to the teenager. "I've decided I want to join you." "What do you mean by that? We're not the army. You can't just sign up." "Yeah, but we want to live here. I can work. I don't have a broken ankle. I can really work hard. I can pedal, I can dig. Whatever you want me to do, I can do." "Where do you think you're going to sleep, son?" Lim said. He looked miserable. "I don't know. Someone's couch?" Lim and Tanisha and I looked at each other, and Tanisha said, "It's too cold to stand around chatting. Let's go inside somewhere and figure this out." The lights were on in Susan and Clifford's house, but their welcome banner was tattered by the wind. So Tanisha and I knocked and went in with our new guest. There had been a power outage overnight, but the sharp wind had all but destroyed the wind turbines pumping out power. No peddlers needed, and the city power had come back about a half hour ago. Clifford was puttering around in the kitchen, and Susan was awake because she called.
Who's there? Come say hello.
As soon as we closed the door behind us. "It's me and Alex, and an uninvited guest." "Uninvited?" Clifford said. Where'd he come from?" "Suburbs. He's looking for a place to stay." Jake took a deep breath. "I can pedal, I can dig, I can cook, I can wash, I can shovel." "Why did you come here?" Tanisha asked. "Because I want to live somewhere where people take care of each other." Susan waved him off to her side, took his hand. "Oh, don't worry, kid. They're softies here. They won't throw you out to the wolves. Welcome to the collective. We have a guest bed upstairs. Or at least we did." We gave the bed to Lim. I can't remember why. There's space up there, though, and I'm sure someone has a bed they could bring over. I don't even need a bed. Someone pounded on the front door, and my first thought that it was someone from Jake's suburb, back to reclaim him. But it was Lim's voice. From what we could hear, he sounded gleeful, not worried. Tanisha went open the door. He'd already gone running down to the next house, but his voice carried back to us. I looked up. There was a patch of blue. Just a tiny one. Just a patch of blue. The sunshine was streaming down, cold and bright. I shouted over my shoulder. I ran across the street to knock on more doors, bring people out to see. When I looked back, Clifford had gotten Susan haltingly as far as the front doorstep. Jake behind her, lugging her concentrator. They were looking up at the sky. The break in the not-quite clouds, squinting in the sunshine, that same expression of wonder on their faces that I was feeling. And when I returned to Susan and Clifford's house, Jake was earnestly trying to explain to Tanisha that seeing the peddlers had made him realize there was a better way. And I took him. And I said to him, "You're in. It's fine. We'll spot you. Let's just bask in the glory of the knowledge that spring might actually come this year."